Today's guest has 30 years of experience in cosmetic dermatology, 3 award-winning books, and a top 10 radio show with 3 million listeners per month. Today he's going to share with you new insights, ideas and information to live a fantastic life. Would you please help me welcome Dr. Alan Lycka. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Danielle.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Well, I'd like to rewind the clock because there's some phenomenal achievements there, and I want to go back to the start of the journey. Where did you start from, and what was the dream?
You know, I started many years ago back. I decided to go into medical school, and in medical school, I found that I had a passion for dermatology, so then I started chasing my dream in dermatology. I'm a Canadian. There are not many Canadian dermatology schools. So I went to a dermatology school at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so I spent 3 years there. Then I came back home to Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. I started practicing and doing my thing. I really loved doing dermatology. It was fantastic starting off and doing what I love doing. You know, we had invented lasers. We had invented other great things back then. Botox was just invented, so I started using that as one of the early people with that. We started using collagen to help as a wrinkle fixer and things like that. Then soon after, other products came out that were even better than collagen. And so I was one at the forefront of all these things. I was one of the first people that used something called tumescent ultrasonic liposuction, a way of doing liposuction totally under local anesthesia. So it was a great time in the life of dermatology. And, you know, I was a leader in the field. I was at the top of my career when all of that changed in about 2003.
So at the top level, it sounds like success might have been a straight line for a while. And then you get to 2003. What was the turning point at 2003? What happened? And I think really importantly for me and my audience, what did you do with what happened?
Well, that's, I think, what's important. In 2003, I was walking with my wife and my youngest daughter in Disneyland, the happiest place on earth. And my wife turned to me and she said, "What's wrong with you, hon?" You know, Dan, for once in my life, I hadn't said anything wrong. I hadn't done anything wrong. I hadn't even thunk anything wrong. But she persisted. "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "What do you mean, dear?" She said, "Listen to your foot." I said, "That's the stupidest thing you ever said. What do you mean, listen to your foot?" Well, she said, "Listen to it." Well, my right foot had suddenly, mysteriously developed a right foot drop. It was flapping on the pavement with each step that I was taking. And she said, "Did you have a stroke?" I said, "Dear, you're a doctor. I'm a doctor. If I had a stroke, I'd probably be lying on the pavement, muttering something unintelligible." Well, she said, "When you get back, you better get this checked out." Well, Dan, when your significant other tells you that, what do you do?
Better follow the rules.
You better follow
the governor's rules.
That's right. So I went and saw dozens of doctors, which led to hundreds of doctors. They did brain scans. They did CAT scans. They even did scans. And you know what they showed at the end of the day? Absolutely nothing. The doctors were befuddled, you know. They thought there was a brain tumor or a slipped disc or something. So they were very perturbed about what they didn't see. So they did more tests, and they did more tests, and they did more tests. And at the end of the day, they got together as a group and they said, "Well, let's send him to a neurologist." You know, a neurologist is the brain guy. He's got all the answers to these complex pictures. So he said, let's send him to this guy. So I walked in and I said, "Hi." And he said, "Hi back. You better be sitting down when I tell you this." I said, "Why? I've got a dropped right foot." He said, "No, you don't. You have ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. You better get your affairs in order. You're going to be dead in 6 months. Well, I shot back, is there a way to prove this diagnosis? He said, of course, on autopsy. So I ran out and I slammed the door and I said, I'm not going to die to prove you wrong. But Dan, when you go through this, you go through the stages of death and dying that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote in her book on death and dying. You go through anger. You're mad at the world. I was mad at my wife. I was mad at my children. I was mad at my patients. I was mad at my staff. But Dan, I couldn't tell them what was wrong, because if I did, they'd probably abandon me. So I was angry. You go through bargaining. Oh God, please don't let this happen. I will do anything if you don't let this happen. You go through denial. There's nothing wrong. I can do anything. But my right foot wasn't working right, so I couldn't deny it. And then my right hand started not working right. I couldn't grasp the instruments that I used to when I was doing surgery. But I was smart, Dan. I became left-handed instead of right-handed. And I was able to do everything with my left hand that my right hand could. But back then, there weren't even the instruments that you needed. I had to invent left-handed surgical scissors. I had to use left-handed instruments because everything's the same, but the opposite. And they weren't available in surgery back then. But I adapted. But then you go through depression. Dan, have you ever been depressed?
I was once diagnosed with depression.
Yeah. It's a terrible state, isn't it? That's when everything is black. I call those the black days. You can't eat. You can't sleep. You stay in bed looking at the ceiling. Why get out of bed? You're going to die anyhow. And I wasn't going to die by ALS gasping for air like I saw during my medical career. So I had a plan to kill myself. I was going to end it all. I said, this is enough. But I went to my wife and I said, dear, what do I have? And she said, I haven't got the faintest idea, she said. But she said, you're smart. You'll figure that out. I said, how can I? I've seen hundreds of doctors. They couldn't have the answer. But she said, perhaps you just haven't found the right doctor yet. So back in the early 2000s, something brand new was invented. You might have heard about it. It's called the internet.
Yes.
But back then, it was so primitive. You had to get on by dial-on connections. That means your computer your phone would attach to another phone. And it would go ria, ria, ria for like 15 minutes. And if it attached, you'd be able to get to the other side to talk to people on the other side. Now, the internet was much like the internet now. It was full of the best resources, but it was also full of garbage cans. And you couldn't tell the garbage cans from the best resources. So, it was, I needed friends to help me out. And they were able to research the internet. And they found a doctor in Colorado Springs, Colorado, by the name of David Martz. He had a story very similar to mine, but he got worse much more rapidly. And within weeks of his diagnosis, he was on his deathbed. Now, David was so beloved, doctors from around the world were coming to say goodbye to him. And a doctor from Texas came to see him, and he said, David, I don't think you have ALS. I don't think you have Lou Gehrig's disease. David said, what do I have? The doctor said, I think you've been bitten by a tick. And that tick has caused a chronic neurological illness. It's called chronic Lyme's disease. Well, David said, well, what do I do? The doctor says, I'm going to start you on treatment. And if I'm right, you'll get rapidly better. And that's when a miracle happened. Within 2 weeks, David was like Lazarus arising from the dead. He was back to his regular activities. So I knew I had to get in touch with this man. So I phoned every hospital at Colorado Springs, Colorado. And I met up with David at the Methodist Hospital, of all places. And there we talked for hours. And he said, can you come down to see me? I said, sure. When would you like to see me? He said, right now. I said, David, this is Thanksgiving in Canada. My wife will kill me if I come down.
You're going to be dead already.
He said, don't worry. He said, there must be some planes in Canada that could bring you down. So I talked to my wife and I explained to her I was going to be away. She immediately said, I'll pack your bags for you. I'll take you to the airport. What are you waiting for? So there we go. I got to Colorado Springs, Colorado, and David and I talked for hours. And David said, I think history is repeating himself. And, that's the beautiful thing, is because he started me on treatment. I was able to get through all those years, and I was able to stay at the top of my career until 2019, when I walked away to help people in other ways from what I was doing as a cosmetic surgeon. So, Dan, it's not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens. That's what you have to realize. World is going to throw curveballs at you. It's going to throw curveballs in life. It's going to throw curveballs in business. It's going to throw curveballs all the time. You're going to be tested every step along the way. But if you stand up and allow the test to be taken, you're going to do fine. And I think that's what people have to realize. It's not what happens to you. It's what you do with what happens.
I love that pearl of wisdom. It's not what happens to you, but it's what you do with it. When people are faced with those challenges and they don't have the resources, or they perceive themselves to be somebody without resources, what prevents them from, living that fantastic life? What gets in the way?
I think it's a couple of things. First of all, people lose their purpose of living. They just don't know what their purpose is. When they don't have their purpose, they lose their vision. They lose their tenacity. They lose all of that because there's no reason to have that. And that's what I went through for a while, when I went through my depression and my anger and my all those phases I went through. But people go through many of these phases as well. And when they lose their purpose, they really just don't have a reason to move forward and to do all those things that they thought they should do.
I see a lot of people get stuck at biological motivation. So they're just making enough money just to survive. And they live hand to mouth, maybe paycheck to paycheck at the best. Once they get out of that, they then start to chase the dollars, and they have these extrinsic motivators. But I think for a lot of people that I've spoken to, nobody on their deathbed said, I wish I'd made more money. Well, let me quickly check the internet banking. It's more like, how can I live another day? How could have I done something different to live a more purposeful life? And I find that those people who are stuck between biological and extrinsic motivation, their purposes are so beyond their control that even at the start, I think they set themselves up for failure and they self-sabotage.
I think people do self-sabotage a lot. And I think they don't have the mindset to help them through that. And I think they haven't developed a mindset to do that. They've lived this simple existence of, if you say, hand to mouth. And then when they start making some dollars, then the dollars become all that important. And they forget the important things in life. I don't think we should live to work. I think we should work to live. And that is what people really need to do along the way. They need to realize there are things in their life that are more important than working. And when they find those things, those are the things their life should revolve around. Those are those things that should become the most important. Those are the things that people should live for each and every day, because that is where the true power is. That is where the magnificence of living is.
I remember when I grew up, nobody sat me down and said, what's your purpose? It wasn't a typical conversation at home. And when I went to school, I learned a lot of the what and the how, what I'm learning, and this is how you apply it. But nobody ever sat down and said, this is why you're learning it, or discovering my motivation. So when I went through school, I was trying to figure out, well, what's this purpose? What's all this new information coming through? And how does it apply to me? But I remember when I was probably around about 9 or 10, I had been working with my uncle, and he had a news agency, so I was his paper boy. And I walked out of the news agency and I donated half of my pocket money to charity. So if I earned $1, I gave away 50 cents. And my mum asked me, she said, what are you doing? And I thought I was in trouble. And I said, well, I'm just making a donation. She said, why? And I said, I just like to help people. So at that stage, I could sense that I wanted to be a people helper, but it was very different from, say, the path that you took. And so I could see myself helping people, but I wouldn't give them medicine. I wouldn't give them injections. I wouldn't perform operations, but I was helping them. And it wasn't until I met a life coach in 2008 that I went, oh, this is another way that I can help people that's in alignment with my personality style. And I found that, but I found that mentor at age 28. So the direction of my life rapidly changed for me. But I think a lot of people, even in their mid-30s, 40s and 50s, are still struggling. And as I mentioned before in our conversation, some of the people in our community are getting towards the end of their working life. They've served 20 and 30 years. They're coming into their late 50s, early 60s, and they've said, I've just spent the past 20 or 30 years doing something that I don't like and enjoy, but I still don't know what I want.
Yeah, I can understand that, and I can understand where the problem is there. You know, when I was a cosmetic doctor, one of the skills I learned was how to treat scars. And finally, lasers had developed to the extent that we could take some of the most gruesome scars and improve them to the extent that they could almost vanish. You know, the bad burn victims that you see, things like that. So I was very fortunate that I was able to use that technology and help these burn survivors even turn back to normal lives. And so, and I never charged for any of these services along the way. I thought that was wrong to do. And it was something that gave me some of my greatest gratification along the way, helping people with those scars and making them vanish and getting people back to their normal lives. And that was something that I was able to do as well. Because I had gone through so much, one of the things I tried to do was to give a lot back. And that was a very important part of my life, was to give back throughout with what I was doing.
One struggle that I see is that people can be in a career for 10, 20, 30 years and still nobody knows their name. And they have no authority, they have no influence. And I see it's something that they really struggle with, is getting this authority and then getting their word out there. What are some of the secrets to getting authority? What have you learned along the way?
Well, first, number one thing is, I think, to show love and kindness to everybody around you. If you greet everybody that you meet and smile at them and give them a little touch and a little bit of kindness along the way, I think authority follows. There's such a greatness that comes out of that little gift of love and kindness that people don't even realize how powerful that is. Picture every day going to work and saying hi to everybody, smiling and being happy, and just allowing everything to happen. Really, the world changes when you change the world. When you do that, the world becomes a better place through all this.
Such a simple thing. We have a saying here in Asia that a man without a smile shouldn't open a shop. And my mum would say we owned a pawnbroking business, and we would be buying and selling second-hand goods, would be doing payday advances. And she said, Daniel, just let honey drips from your lips. And we would smile at all of our customers, and it really made, first of all, our world a better place because we felt better about our environment. And then secondly, we didn't have a fraction of a percent of the problems that all the other pawnbrokers were having, because
Yeah.
we had created our own little environment. And what I say to people today, and I think they're starting to understand it, is that emotions are more contagious than COVID. And when you smile, when you express that unconditional positive regard, which I think a lot of people still don't get that. They've got to have that unconditional. They've got to make sure there's no judgment whatsoever.
Absolutely.
Then
And
people
so
open
you
up.
see, there's a little secret to authority. I mean, it comes from within, and it comes from every little action that you do. And if you unconditionally love others and show that unconditional love, authority naturally follows because everybody recognizes your name.
It's a big one. Ladies and gentlemen, you've got to take that pearl of wisdom away right there. It is important in today's world. I think we're all struggling. I think it's even harder to see who's struggling because of what we do with social media. We post they even call it the highlight. There's no low lights. It's just, these are the highlights. These are the best things. But they're just a smither of what's actually happening behind the scenes. Now, for people...
I think social media is both a good things and a bad things. It allows us to communicate, but that's about all it does. And if people think their friends on social media are truly their friends, they're sorely mistaken by that. You know, this is not a media where you develop friends. You develop friends by doing good deeds, helping them, and doing things in that sort of light. You know, acts of gratitude are just as important as anything else.
Talking about acts of gratitude, one thing that I felt very conflicted about when I first started to use social media was people doing what we called in Australia random acts of kindness. And it came from the radio shows. But then people started to do it on social media. And where the confliction came for me was I saw people doing random acts of kindness for social media views.
I think that's, you see, again, a random act of kindness has to be random, and it's not to get anything back in return for it. That's what it's all about. And it should be done at best anonymously, because if you do it anonymously, then you won't get anything back for it.
I think that's another pearl of wisdom right there. For people who are at that stage in their life, and what I say to my community is one new idea at the right time can really change your life. What can they start to learn from you and your website, dralanlycka.com? What can we take away from here today?
Let me tell you a little story, if I can, Daniel.
Please.
A little story. And there was a carpenter, and his name was Fred. And he had worked in the same company for 40 years. And he was tired. He was done. He couldn't do it anymore. So he went to his boss and threw his keys on the desk and said, "Boss, I'm done. I can't work anymore." The boss was taken aback. He said, "Fred, you're my master carpenter. You've helped me build all the houses we've ever built." He said, "Please, Fred, could you do just one more thing for me before you leave?" Fred said, "Of course, boss. I've loved it here. This is the only job I've ever had. What would you like me to do?" The boss said, "Could you please build me just one more house? Only you can do it. Only you, my master carpenter, has the skills to do it." So Fred did it, but his heart was not into it. He'd drag his arse to work every day. He'd hate the job. He'd work a couple hours a day and barely got the job done. But at the end of it, a miracle happened. The house passed inspection. So he went back to the boss, threw his keys on the desk and said, "I'm out of here." The boss said, "Hold it, Fred. We're going to have a party." So he called everybody in the office together. They cracked the champagne. They had caviar. They had a great party. And then the boss gathered everybody around and he said, "You know, everybody, this is Fred's last day. I'm going to be heartbroken, but he's going to be very happy," he said. "And, you know, but I've got a little gift for Fred. Fred, here's the keys to the last house you ever built. May you live in it with all the enthusiasm you've showed me every day of your life. Now, Dan, I tell you that because enthusiasm's not a Monday thing. It's not a Friday thing. It's not a Wednesday thing. It's the game breaker that you bring to the game every day. And if you do that, life is definitely going to be different.
So true. So true. A mentor said to me when I started my real estate career, he said, don't worry about the competition. He said, enthusiasm outsells experience 10 to 1. He said, you go out there, you show them how enthusiastic you are. Show them how excited you are. Show them your willingness to work and smile every day. And he said, and that will outsell that experience 10 to 1. And I had that enthusiasm. You know, you had that little twinkle in your eye. You got that spring in your step, and it paid off. And so that really connects with me, that story. Enthusiasm, just so important.
For sure. It's one of the most important things you could ever do in your life. Carry that enthusiasm for you. And if, just bring a little bit to the table every game. And that is the game changer. That is what makes it.
I was confused at a time about enthusiasm and how to deal with it and how to demonstrate it. And I thought enthusiasm was because I'd seen those people coming out of the Tony Robbins UPW, and they'd been jumping up and down for 14 days, and I thought, oh my gosh, I don't want to be jumping up and down in front of my customers and bringing this energy to them. And then I looked at that and went, I can't do that. But then I learned about constrained enthusiasm. And it was like as if you'd shaken up the bottle of champagne and you're ready to pop the cork, but you never pop it. It's like that energy is inside of it. You can feel it, but the top hasn't popped off yet.
Yeah.
And once I learned that about constrained enthusiasm, that was a game changer for me, because I didn't feel I had, because as a preference for introversion, I prefer to be calmer, a little bit more stoic. But once I bought in that constrained enthusiasm, that was contagious. And that really worked for my style.
Well, just think about just having a twinkle in your eye or a smile or that effervescence. I guess that's the word that I describe. Effervescence, because it literally bubbles out of you. You don't have to be jumping up and down with it. You just have to let it flow.
So true. So true. Well, we're going to flow some traffic over to your website, and we want people to come and learn about what you're doing with your movement. And when they come to dralanlycka.com, what can we learn? What can we take away from your website?
There's a lot of great stuff in there. There's information about my speaking. There's information about me coaching. And if a person would like a free 15-minute discovery call, they can sign up for it right there. They can learn about my podcast, where I literally have hundreds of shows on there that you can learn about. You can learn about my syndicated radio show that now has 3 million listeners a month, which is pretty phenomenal.
Huge.
There's all this wonderful stuff for you there, and we'd love to help you. You can pick up a copy of my book there, The Secrets to Living a Fantastic Life. A book that I will guarantee that will change your life if you follow the principles in it.
Ladies and gentlemen, what I want you to do now is head over to dralanlycka.com. Make sure you get a copy of the book. And if you're at that stage in your life where you're stuck and you don't know what to do next, then I want you to secure your 15-minute complimentary session with Dr. Alan Lycka. You've heard from him today. You're not learning from the climb. You're learning from the result. And somebody here who has years and many pearls of wisdom to share with you. What we know is one new idea at the right time is enough to change your life. So I want you to head to dralanlycka.com now and learn more about his movement. Dr. Alan, thank you so much for sharing your insights, your information, your enthusiasm, and those pearls of wisdoms for us to live a better life.
Daniel, thank you so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun. This has been a great show. Thank you again.
My pleasure. Thank you for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, remember, one new idea at the right time is enough to change your life. Have a wonderful day.